Oh, hi, I'm John Atack, and I'm delighted to welcome my old friend now. We've known each other for years, Jeffrey.
Years and years and years.
Yeah,
Even I think past lifetimes, other
many,
planet,
many, many, many past lifetimes, billions of
millennia.
cold-blooded and factually 76 or 60 trillion years, depending on which version you read.
Give or take, yeah.
And we will be making constant references to things that anybody who's not had the misfortune of being involved with Scientology probably won't understand. So please ask questions in the comments if we do become too elaborate and Byzantine in what we're saying. So, Jeffrey, you wanted to talk about this interesting paradox in Scientology that you are promised the sun, moon, and stars, and then you are shown this thing saying, well, no, actually, these are all religious or spiritual claims, which is to say they're lies. So that's another way of putting it, I know. Do you want to start by reading some of the
Sure.
statement about none of this actually being true?
Yeah, let me preface it by saying that if you go to my blog, the ScientologyMoneyProject.com, and you just use the search function to say guarantee, you'll find my blog post of June 14, 2014 called Church of Scientology, We Do Not Guarantee Anything. And what's interesting is when L. Ron Hubbard launched Dianetics, Modern Science of Mental Health on May 9, 1950. And by the way, the Scientology does date their calendar from the launch of Dianetics.
After Dianetics, AD. Doesn't mean Anno Domini anymore.
We would be living in year 71.
Year 71.
On the Scientology calendar. Well, anyway, L. Ron Hubbard made incredible promises that you know Dianetics is.
I have them here, actually.
Would you like read them, please? Yeah, read these claims.
Dianetics would clear people of irrational behavior. A clear, according to the book, would have no compulsions, repressions, or psychosomatic ills, full control of his imagination, a near perfect memory. IQ would soar by as much as 50 points, and a clear would be phenomenally intelligent. Dianetics could rescue a broken marriage. The individual would be freed of psychoses and neuroses, and Dianetics claimed to cure asthma, poor eyesight, color blindness, hearing deficiencies, stuttering, allergies, sinusitis, arthritis, high blood pressure, coronary trouble, dermatitis, ulcers, migraine, conjunctivitis, morning sickness, alcoholism, and the common cold. Even tuberculosis would be alleviated. Dianetics would have a marked effect upon the extension of life. I'd just like to point out that Ron Hubbard was 17 years younger than his own father when he died. So it didn't work for him. And a clear could do a computation which a normal would do in half an hour in 10 or 15 seconds. And Hubbard claimed that he'd treated 273 people by this time and found the single and sole source of aberration. Dianetics would be effective on anyone who had not had a large portion of his brain removed or been born with a grossly malformed nervous structure, and could be practiced straight from the book with no training. Therapy would take anything from 30 to 1,200 hours, by which time the person would be clear. He also added that leukemia is evidently psychosomatic in origin, and at least 8 cases of leukemia had been treated successfully with Dianetics after medicine had traditionally, and that's the word he uses, given up. The source of leukemia has been reported to be an engram containing the phrase, "It turns my blood to water."
Turns my blood to water. Yeah, I remember reading that years ago. And, you know, one thing, because Hubbard wasn't looking at the future, I'm obviously not a clear. Clearly not a clear based on that. I need eyeglasses, and also Dianetics and Scientology cannot cure addiction to Starbucks or digital. Anyway, I'm drinking Starbucks. But what's interesting, so Hubbard represented that Scientology had miraculous cures. And fast forward to 1996, 10 years after the Commodore died, there's a Scientology document. It's a Scientology Policy Directive, 13 March 1966. It says statements by staff members. Okay.
Yep.
So it says, quote, at no time did L. Ron Hubbard promise people anything or claim anything for Dianetics and Scientology. His writings are a record of observations and research and are offered by him as such. Unquote. So the Church of Scientology is saying L. Ron Hubbard never promised anyone anything when he did. And in fact, if you look on Scientology's Bridge to Total Freedom, there are abilities gained at each level. So on, you know, one of the grades, ability, is it to communicate freely with anyone about anything?
On any subject.
Yeah, what grade is that?
That's grade 0, the communication release.
Now let's stop there. Hubbard on the Bridge to Freedom clearly promises abilities gained. And this statement to staff members says, L. Ron Hubbard didn't promise anything to anybody. And here's another contradiction. Ability to communicate freely with anybody on anything is a grade 0 release in Scientology. That's the bottom of the bridge. So if I complete that, I should be able to talk to you about anything.
But you can't, because I'm a suppressive person and you're not allowed to talk to me.
Or if I'm ordered to disconnect from friends or family as a Scientologist, I can't talk to them about anything.
And you can't talk about your case, any of your troubles or problems, except in session. And you can't talk about Scientology or Dianetics because that's verbal technology.
Right. And if you talk about something that I think is untoward, I have to write a knowledge report on you to the Religious Technology Center saying, John Atack was giving out verbal tech. He suggested that Ron was less than perfect. He
suggested that Ron had made claims.
He was critical of church management or the leading names of Scientology. He made a joke about Tom Cruise.
I would never do that. No,
but I'm saying hypothetically if you did. So it's interesting. Now we continue on in the document. It says, quote, parishioners applying or seeking service from the church should be made aware of the Scientology Policy Directive. So what you have to do, you're advised that we're not promising you anything. You can't rely upon any statement made by a staff member. So if a Scientology registrar wants to separate you from $50,000 to do your grades, I have interviewed hundreds of Scientologists, and you've probably interviewed thousands. Registrars make all kinds of promises. All kinds of promises if you sign up for services for the L's, OT levels, everything. They make promises all the time. But this document tells Scientologists in writing that they can't rely on anything said by a Scientology staff member. Now, what's interesting about this document, it says, quote, all staff members should be aware of this Scientology Policy Directive, and in offering service or enrolling parishioners on services, must not make promises or claims or statements concerning results, but must inform the person that it is his own responsibility, and additionally must obtain attestation in every enrollment that no promises, statements, or claims for Dianetics or Scientology were made by him, made to him by a staff member, that he inferred no such promises had been made to him through the works of L. Ron Hubbard, unquote. So basically what's that saying? Before you can take any service in Scientology, you have to sign a legal document saying, I've been promised nothing as a result of this. The upshot of this document is that the onus or burden for any results in Scientology rests solely upon the parishioner. So yes, you can gain the ability to communicate freely with anybody on anything. However, it's all up to you. Contrast this with L. Ron Hubbard saying Scientology is an exact science, and when it's applied correctly, it will invariably obtain the results. It cannot not work.
And I think it's called the senior policy of Scientology. We always deliver what we promise. But of course, you've signed a contract saying that you understand that all of our promises are lies.
Yeah, and that's a central thing. L. Ron Hubbard's policy is we always deliver what we promise. But fast forward,
We don't promise anything.
we don't promise or guarantee anything, nor did L. Ron Hubbard ever promise or guarantee anything. So you can see when you get down into the actual, and this is what fascinates me, John, how Scientology is actually made, how it's actually done, not what its promotional material says, but what its legal contracts say. And these are legally binding, these documents you sign. So if they promise that they can handle some condition for you in life, you can't rely upon that promise or representation.
And your IQ may not go up by 50 points.
Yeah, you may actually lose IQ points.
I mean, there's been since the suit, I think it was with the Food and Drug Administration over the e-meter in the 1960s, there's been this little disclaimer in the beginning of all of the books. And this is my personal copy of Scientology 0.8 from 1975. It's got my signature in it, isn't it? And the little book plate. It's great. And it says, where are we? The attainment of the benefits and goals of Scientology requires each individual's dedicated participation, as only through his own efforts can he himself, as a spiritual being, achieve these. This is part of the religious literature and works of the founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard. It is presented to the reader as part of the record of his personal research into life and should be construed only as a written report of such research and not as a statement of claims made by the church or the author. If we then contrast that with the statement we have here made by L. Ron Hubbard, a child had died, was dead, had been pronounced dead by a doctor, and the auditor, by calling the Thetan, or spirit, back and ordering him to take over the body again, brought the child to life. But this claim is not true, according to the contract that we're going to say. You can cure cancer. Cancer has been eradicated by auditing out conception and mitosis, cellular division. That's in The History of Man, which was published in 1952, firstly. I got involved in the last minute in a court case in Los Angeles in 1988, which Hannah and Jerry Whitfield and Valerie and Manfred Stansfield and various other people were involved in. I think there were about 420 plaintiffs in the class, and they'd had a problem. They'd had their complaint rejected 4 times. And the judge normally would have just thrown them out by then. You don't get 4 bites of the cherry. But the judge was obviously sympathetic. And he said, well, 2 problems. 1, you haven't proved that you're a class, that you have a common cause. And 2, you haven't proved that the people you're suing are a class. So I had 2 weeks in LA and very little preparation. Met with the lawyers who I think had been working on this for 2 years by then. And they were tremendously relieved after a conversation with me. And they confided to me they hadn't had a clue what these people were talking about. And so I put together, firstly, a demonstration that Scientology is a monolithic corporation, completely governed. Although at that time it had at least 400 sub-organizations. They're all governed by David Miscavige. And that argument was accepted in a couple of other cases later on. And the IRS were quite keen on it too, I'm told. But the other part, putting together a class and saying, well, what are you a class over? This religious hurdle is very difficult to overcome. So I pointed out, having thought about it for a while, that Dianetics, the modern science of mental health, is a science, according to Scientology. So whatever their religious pretensions, they are making claims of cure in that book. And the particular claim that had been made to all of these people was that they would become clear. And about 6 months later, I called Hannah up because I hadn't heard what had happened. And so, well, the judge accepted the corporate monolith argument. I said, well, what about the idea that everybody was promised the state of clear? And she said, and I remember her words exactly, we didn't want to denigrate the state of clear. Because at that point, many of the people who were actually involved in the action were still Scientologists who still believed in these things. And so, unfortunately, that great chance to get something into court and have it tried on the basis of actual claims made, and before this contract, you know, I'd never signed a contract of that type. So that chance was lost. And maybe I had something to do with persuading that they ought to issue such a contract.
This is interesting. This is interesting for two reasons. When the Church of Scientology was applying for religious tax exemption, the second time, you know, it lost its tax exemption in 1967. That was the old Church of Scientology of California. Yeah. The IRS revoked tax exemption because it found inurement went to L. Ron Hubbard and his family.
Yep.
L. Ron Hubbard, the ship Apollo was considered Hubbard's personal yacht, and he lost tax exemption. So when they reapplied in the early 90s, 1992, they made certain representations to the IRS. And it got into the nature and structure of the church. And it makes for real interesting reading, because by then the church is caught between a rock and a hard place. It has to tell the IRS what it can and can't do, and what it what it is and what it is not. Mm-hmm. So for example, as I've demonstrated many times, the Sea Org does not exist. It is not a legal entity at all. It's not a legal entity. It has no address, no phone number. It doesn't exist. Okay. The Church of Scientology itself, Church of Scientology, does not exist. No,
never did.
It's a term of convenience to represent all these different legal corporations. And here's an interesting bit of chicanery. I'm reading a legal case. You know, I'm a licensed private investigator in California. I get involved in all kinds of cases that do not involve Scientology. But what's interesting, some of these cases of financial fraud resemble Scientology because con artists use a lot of the same tricks.
Of course they do.
There was a case where a gentleman sued Hartford Insurance. And Hartford Insurance went in and said, Hartford Insurance is a trademark and you cannot sue a trademark. And they got the initial suit thrown out for being defective, naming an entity as a trademark. So you have to be careful when you sue the Church of Scientology to get it exact, the construction of who you're suing, which corporation, because every church in the Church of Scientology is a legally separate corporation, right? You have to, like, even to try to get David Miscavige served, he's suddenly not a resident of California. He's a...
He's in the Dutch Antilles, doesn't he?
Pardon me?
He lives in the Dutch Antilles, doesn't he?
I think he's a Florida resident.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
You know, if I were asked to serve him, apparently he's at flag quite a bit. So, you know, there's a lot of legally evasive things. And in this statement to staff members, talking about lawsuits, all of this arises because of lawsuits.
Yeah.
That's why it all arises. And I wanted to read from statements from staff members. I apologize for my phone. That's facts I can't do anything about.
That's fine.
It says, quote, a reason for this Scientology policy directive stems from a review of past and current litigation, which indicates that many of the claims flow from alleged misrepresentations made to them concerning the values of the Scientology religion. Mm-hmm. It goes without saying, of course, that such litigants are usually professionals who hope to make money dishonestly by shaking down organizations, successful individuals, or wealthy persons. Oddly, such a person could not possibly benefit from Scientology since he means it harm. Thus, it becomes a foregone conclusion that the person will not benefit. Mm. Their percentage is very small, yet society, as it is at this time, seems to be slanted in the direction of favoring such people's claims, even when they lie. Thus, care must be taken on this point, unquote. Mm. Now, let's parse this, John.
Yep.
The church doesn't want to be sued, so they say a reason for this Scientology policy directive, meaning that we don't promise anything, stems from a review of past and current litigation in which many of the claims flow from alleged misrepresentations made of them concerning the values of the Scientology religion. So Scientology is being sued because people have been promised benefits, higher IQ, improved whatever,
being raised from the dead.
Yeah. There's actually a instruction on get back into that body.
That's it.
Get back into the body command. So Scientology is, when you get into Scientology, the first thing to do is find your ruin. What is bothering you, John?
What's they try to find what can't you deal with in your life? We'll handle that.
Well, yeah, they're trying to find your ruin, and whatever your ruin is, the answer will always be Scientology can handle it. So that's the setup. You just drill into the person's psyche using their personality test, their so-called Oxford capacity analysis. And it'll be, John, the results of your test show that you're insecure, you're unable to communicate with women, you're nervous, you're a chronic masturbator, blah, 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 whatever.
You know all these things, Jeffrey.
Because your test, your Scientology test shows it. No, I mean, it's like, you have guilt over what you stole money from your mother or whatever. You know what I mean? People always have problems, right?
Of course
so psychologically, the Oxford capacity analysis is a tool of predation to get into a person's psyche, find out what their ruin is, and say Scientology can rescue you from that.
Yeah, and it does have a trick involved in it. When I got in Scientology, I was not recruited. I walked in, having read Science of Survival by Hubbard. And I did a Oxford capacity analysis written by Ray Kemp from a redraft of an original personality test by Mary Sue Hubbard. Ray Kemp's qualification to write a personality test was that he had been a merchant seaman. And they're very knowledgeable about psychology, I think. But anyway, I did this, and when I'd done it, and it's, what, 200 questions? A client who went to Michael Flynn, not General Michael Flynn, but the Boston lawyer, Lavenda Van Schaik, his first client, she went to him, and he said to her, she said, look, if you take this case on, you'll get a letter from Scientology within a week saying I've had terminations, these things have happened in my life. And he said, how do they know all of these things about you? And she said, I told them. And he said, it would have taken the CIA 2 years to find out all of these things. A 200 question test to see about your personality. So I did mine, and Linda Harrington, who, dear woman, who checked it, said, I'm not going to mark you down. It was 10 years. I left 9 years later. It was 10 years before I found out what she meant. Because then somebody gave me a copy of the manual you use to interpret the personality test. And it said, but it says basically everybody you meet is below death, which is the central line. And so if they score above, you invert the scores. So I still have that original personality test because I'm a hoarder. And I score between 80 and 90% along the top. So what she should have done was reversed it and told me how badly off I was. Now, this may sound trivial. However, a friend of mine, Betty Tilden, who was a wonderful woman, a psychiatrist working in England, she dealt with many Scientology cases over the years and was severely harassed by Scientology. And she had a case where parents came to her because their daughter had killed herself. And by the side of her, they found a copy of her personality test. So...
Yeah. Was that Kaja Balo?
I don't believe so, no. This goes way back into the 70s. I imagine it's happened a number of times that somebody who's feeling a little uncertain about themselves has been told that they're a complete mess, and it's then demanded that they go out and find, you know, $10,000 or what have you, and they feel completely overwhelmed. But it could be the case that somebody was actually in pretty good shape. As according to their test, I was at that time, would then be marked down, and you know, a ruin would be created for them. So you have this devious, manipulative system, which is putting somebody into a place where you after finding the ruin, you do fear of worsening. So you're meant to. I was trained in this, but I thought it was unethical, so I never actually did it. I brought people in Scientology, but I never found anybody's ruin. And I certainly didn't then say, and of course, everything you've tried has failed, hasn't it? You've just got worse and worse, haven't you? And you've given up all hope of getting better. But Scientology can help that. You know, this despicable patter that is used, you then put the person into need of change through the awareness characteristics, and you tell them whatever the problem is, Scientology can deal with that. Now, when I was briefly a street recruiter in Birmingham in 1975, I was told that whatever the problem was, financial problems, marital problems, minor health problems, anything, everything, that you'd say, you sell them the communication course. That was the cure-all. That was the thing you'd do. And I'm going to add a little footnote to this, that I've so often, in the 37 years since I left Scientology, heard ex-members say, some of the basic beginning courses are really good. It's the later stuff that messes you up. I absolutely disagree. The most dangerous aspects of Scientology are the training routines, Book 1 auditing, the purification rundown, and OT3. And I did a talk with Steve Hassan, the Getting Clear of Scientology seminar in 2015, which is on this channel, free of charge, where Steve and I, with the help of Chris Shelton, one of his first public appearances, the wonderful Chris Shelton, and my great friend Christian Sherko, who's one of the true experts on what groups like Scientology can do to you, and he's helped thousands of people in their recovery. But we went through the training routines to show just what you're being set up to do and why they are actually control techniques to make you compliant and obedient so that you'll then accept the rest. As to any benefit you feel from staring at something, you can do that on your own time and you don't have to pay for it. And the hallucinations you get are called the Ganzfeld effect. They're very well known. Mindfulness is the current buzz to try and get people thinking it's helpful to fixate your perception. It can be to a limited extent. It can also, you know, I was commissioned to write a book about transcendental meditation by Collins back in '91. And after 6 months research, I said, I'm not writing this book. I've got one crazy group chasing me. I don't want another. But I interviewed so many people who'd done transcendental meditation and had come to harm. Again, there's conversations I had with Joe Kelly and Pat Ryan on the channel here, who were both deeply involved in transcendental meditation. And you'd find people, I'd talk with people who'd spend 12 hours a day sitting and staring at the wall. They'd neglect their children. They'd lose their job because they wanted this pretty much euphoric state, which, you know, Scientology is all focused on euphoria, very good indicators, which is a normal effect of hypnosis, a normal effect of an altered state of consciousness, that you feel great. You know, the colors in the room are brighter, you feel bigger, all of these kind of things, which you can achieve by getting people to sit and stare at each other. It's not necessarily good for you.
John, you covered a lot of ground. I want to go back.
Yes, sorry.
No, I mean, this is interesting. To use a Tommy Davis movement, we're going to go back. Tommy Davis did that with John Sweeney. He goes, John, let's go back. So
the exploding tomato interview.
Yeah. Okay. So find a person's ruin. That's psychological predation. They use the Oxford capacity analysis. Kajaballo, Kajaballo, that's her name, Kajaballo. She was the daughter of a Norwegian Minister of Parliament in Norway. And in 2008, March, you can Google her on our wiki page, on March 28, 2008, shortly after taking the Scientology test where they found her ruined, she committed suicide. And it was shocking. I was working as a critic on Xenu.net. And of course, the church denied, and we don't know because the church got their attorneys involved. We do know she took the test and they told her something dire, frightening, terrifying, that only Scientology could help. She may have had some secret. We don't know. Her father was a prominent public man, an elected official in Norway. It was tragic because she was so young.
Yes. And
so here, let's go back over what you said. So you find a person's ruin. And, back in the old days, when you could not be a gay man, trans, can be a lesbian, LGBTQ.
All homosexuals, according to Ron Hubbard, and of course none of his claims are true, but all homosexuals, according to Ron Hubbard, are covertly hostile. Yeah,
and a lot of closet cases back then, men and women who had to live in the closet for fear of losing their families or, losing their jobs, because you could lose a job back then.
Of course you could. It could devastate your life. I mean, I'm going to meander again. I had a phone conversation with one of the first 10 real clears of 1965. I interviewed John McMaster, who was called the world's first real clear at some length. And this guy phoned me up. He was a Hollywood set designer. And he said, I've always wondered what it was that 7 out of 10 of the first clears were gay. And I said, I don't really have to think about that very deeply. That in 1965, your life could be destroyed if it was revealed you were gay. John McMaster told me that one day Hubbard came up to him and said, you're clear now. He didn't actually give the clear cognition, the revelation of any kind. Hubbard had decided that he was going to be the public spokesman for Scientology, and he was very good at it. He was immensely successful, but he was a profoundly damaged human being. I came to know him reasonably well, and terrified that anybody, even at this point, and I first met him in 1984, he was terrified that anybody would think he was homosexual.
Yeah, and this is the point. So you get at that period of time, you would get people who may be secretly gay, or nowadays. And what's interesting, when you go in on your early security checks, one of the questions is, have you committed a crime for which you have not been caught?
Yes.
Scientology wants the dirt.
I'd just like to write that down.
So people could have sexual secrets that are bothering them. And nowadays, not so much. They could have committed a crime for which they've not been caught. They could have horrendous personal guilt, shame, whatever. And Scientology wants to find that. Now, what you said, there's a second step where you're going to get worse unless you start with Scientology. Because early in Scientology, you're told, Hubbard tells Scientologists to get the person to a point where they know they're not going to get any worse. He or she knows they're not going to get any worse. Yeah. So there's a promise made that they will spiritually and psychologically stabilize you. So for a lot of people, it's like, oh, thank God, I'm not going to get any worse. I've hit rock bottom and now Scientology is going to pull me out of this abyss. And because I have the grade chart, I get be able to communicate with anybody, and then I'll be able to do this and this and this. And there's degrees that increased abilities you're supposed to gain. And this sounds good on paper, but when you look at the actual legal documents, they're not going to promise it to you. In fact, you have to expressly sign that they have made no promises to you. And even though they're saying Scientology is a science that, when applied exactly, will produce the results that are promised, they back away from it. So this fundamental thing of they do so much, and it reminds me of a verse in the Bible where Jesus is talking to the Pharisees. He's rebuking them, and he's saying, "Woe unto you, Pharisees, you will travel land and sea. You will encompass land and sea to make a convert. But when you make a convert, you make them 10 times the child of hell that you are. So it's these people
close the door of heaven in other men's faces, and having done so, you do not enter yourself. You are as a whited sepulchre, a painted mausoleum.
The whited sepulchre. On the outside, you appear beautiful, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. So Scientology has a form of righteousness, or what the New Testament say, a form of godliness, but denies the power thereof. If we're going to get into Christian language,
let's do it.
So Scientology appears to be righteous, clinical, psychological, scientific, spiritual. It's all things to all people. No matter what you have going on, Scientology can cure it. However, you have to sign some paperwork saying that we didn't promise you anything. Well, we promised you everything. And talking about undue influence, when you've captured a person who's psychologically vulnerable and is reaching out to Scientology for help, it's at that point that Scientology kicks in with all the legal agreements. And I've gone over this in many interviews. You sign the 4 contracts that strip you of your rights to sue, your rights to never see your folder, your agreement that they can lock you up in the introspection rundown, the kidnap contract. So Scientology promises so much, but on paper they deliver so little. And in fact, at the beginning of every course, you have to sign this, that you were not promised anything, and that the burden is on you to produce the result. But John, let's say you go to grade 1, and at the end of grade 1, you're a Scientologist, and you say, I didn't get the EP, the end phenomena. I can't communicate with anyone. I don't feel it worked. I'm not going to write a success story. What happens to the Scientologist when they say, no, it didn't work for me?
You have a choice. You can be sent to qualifications, or you can be sent to ethics.
Now, what does that mean for the,
It means basically that you have failed to properly receive the teaching, that you have not done the right things. And that's either because your qualifications will look for your misunderstood words, and ethics may look for your transgressions, your sins.
Let's go back a minute, because I don't want any listeners to miss something. Yeah. In Scientology, when you complete any course, you have to fill out a success story.
You attest to completion of the course. You'll put on the e-meter to make sure that your needle is floating, and you're asked if you want other people to have the gains that you now have, and you then write a testimonial, a success story to fix the thing. Yeah.
And see, this is again part of the legalese. Scientology makes you attest that you got the gains, and then they make you write a success story. Later on, if you're damaged by the church or you sue them, they'll say, well, we have these success stories that, that John filled out. Yeah. He wasn't unhappy. So it's interesting that there's a lot of duress in legal contracts. You sign away your legal rights. Then at the end of each and every course, you sign that you got what you paid for and that you're happy with it, and you write a success story. That has to be done each and every time. And if you're not willing to do it, then you're in trouble. You're the one who's committed some foul deed. You withheld something, you lied. So you're made wrong for not getting the result they said you would get. In other words, as I've always said, it's a rigged casino. Everything goes in favor of the house.
Yep.
So if you said I didn't get it, I'm not filling out a success story, then you can go to ethics. What are you withholding? What crimes? What didn't you tell us? Have you been sent in? What are you being dishonest about? And this is so, it's hard for people who've never been in church to get their mind around, but everything is set up as a form of manipulation. You can never win if you're a Scientologist. You will never win against the church.
I see Scientology for many years. I've seen Scientology in Hubbard's own terms as a system of implanting.
Mm.
a way of bringing people to believe certain things. And I'm going to pull up just one little idea here. I never, in talking about Scientology, call it the church. The reason for that is because the church, from the etymology of the word, and Hubbard told us we must look at words, is a Christian organization, ecclesias. And I'm not sure, he may have been the first person to actually take the word out of its context and reuse it. Propaganda by redefinition of words, as he put it, is a typical manipulation. When Janet Reitman came to me and asked if I'd help her with her book Inside Scientology, I said, surely, as long as you don't tell anyone that I'm working with you, because I'm sick and tired of being harassed. She then tried to argue with me that Scientology didn't harass people anymore. This was in 2010. And I pointed out that they hadn't taken down any of the libel sites attacking me, so that wasn't in fact true. But she called it the church. And so I came back to her and said, don't really think it's a church. And then she got into an argument about the IRS having determined that it was a religion and many of the followers believing it's a religion. And I decided it wasn't worth arguing with somebody who wasn't going to pay me any money and was going to waste my time. So she did the book on her own. Though you will notice if you look at the first 7 chapters, it says largely based upon A Piece of Blue Sky and Barefaced Messiah, for which I was the researcher and Blue Sky was the basic book. So, you know, she used my work anyway. But my point was different, you know, and the point was simply that Hubbard introduced the term church, and he lied about it. We've seen from the contract that none of his claims are true, which is to say all of his claims are lies. Fundamentally, they are neutral. They are neither true nor false, but none of them are true. Contractually, legally, you accept that nothing L. Ron Hubbard says is true. And that is usually the case, that when we look underneath. So in December 1953, in Camden, New Jersey, L. Ron Hubbard filed 3 church names. One of them was the Church of Scientology. He would later say that it wasn't his idea and he didn't do it. It was Burton Farber in February 1954 who founded the Church of Scientology of California, and that's the first church. That's a lie. The registration documents exist. I have copies of them, and they date.
I have them as well. Yeah,
they date from 3 months before that, and I got them straight from the registry office in Camden. They're not photocopies of other, you know, forgeries or anything like that. The ones I have came from there. The second was the Church of Human Engineering, which thankfully he didn't get into, because who knows what he would have done then. But the third and most interesting one to me was the Church of American Science, because that explains why he used the word church. And I'm going to reach up here. I always keep copies of my dictionaries so I don't get a misunderstood word. I've got the tech dictionary here. And in here, of course, these dictionaries were put together under the direction of John Sanborn, who ran publications from 1954 to 1978. And Hubbard never saw them. He couldn't care less about them. He'd never, to my understanding, I've never heard of him actually rereading anything that he'd written. He had, John used to edit everything. So, for example, the Hymn of Asia, published in 1975, I think. Sanborn was given that in 1954 by Hubbard, and he wouldn't publish it. He wouldn't put it out because it said, I am Matea. And Sanborn was like, you can't say that. And Sanborn in 74 realized he could reword it, am I Matea? And that was acceptable. So he wrote that, not Hubbard. But we have in here the Modern Management Technology Defined by L. Ron Hubbard, the Administrative Dictionary, Church of American Science. And this just slipped in here. We probably never have noticed otherwise. There is a difference between the Church of American Science and the Church of Scientology. The Church of American Science is a Christian religion. It believes in the Holy Bible, Jesus is the Savior of man, and everything that's necessary to be a Christian religion. Not particularly good grammar, but that's what it says. People who belong to that church are expected to be Christians. These two churches fit together. We take somebody in And I think that is a true expression. We take somebody in. You've been taken in. We take somebody in as a Church of American Science. Again, grammatically poor. It doesn't disagree with his baptism or other things like that. And he could gradually slide over into some sort of better, wider activity, such as the Church of Scientology, and a little more wisdom and come a little more close to optimum. Then if he was good, and one of the people that we would like to have around, he would eventually slide into the Hubbard Association of Scientologists International. So we have provided stepping stones to Scientology with these organizations. So the whole church thing was so he could recruit Christians. And then it became this wonderful barrier saying, well, we're a religion, you know, we believe.
Sure. But, you know, John, it's interesting. As a corporate person, here's how I interpret as a corporate person. What he's doing with the Church of American Science, the Christian version, the Christianized version, right?
Yeah.
Is he's giving Christians an exit strategy into Scientology.
Something better, such as Scientology.
But listen to this. Exit strategies are really important in corporate life. So it's exit barriers are part of it too. How do we retain customers?
Yeah.
Cell phone contracts have all kinds of exit barriers. You have to pay a lot of money to get out of it, right? So you're just going to keep it.
Yeah.
Now, exit strategy is where it's smart to depart a position, but you want to do it in a way that doesn't attract them toward. So Hubbard can't say Christianity is an implant, an R6 implant laid in on the whole track by the Sykes, you know, billions.
You have to wait until you find that out. Yeah, it was the Nestorians, or it was 75 million years ago, or the Nicomedeans, or whatever. Yeah.
So you can have your Bible and you can have your Dianetics, but over time, and this became reflected, you know, this has been covered many times, but Scientologists like Joey Villa have tried to say you can be a Scientologist and a Christian. But they told the IRS, the Church of Scientology told the IRS in its 1992 application for tax exemption that Scientologists are expected to leave whatever religion they are and become Scientologists to the exclusion of other practices.
Yeah.
However, they can observe the ceremonial things like Passover or Christmas. You can observe the ceremonial aspect, but you are expected to leave your previous faith and become a dedicated Scientologist to the exclusion of all other things. Now, this again gets into the legalese. They won't tell you that. The PR story is Scientology will cure everything. You can be a Scientologist and a Christian, a Buddhist.
It's an eclectic religion. You are told it is eclectic, meaning you can be anything.
Well, Hubbard claimed it was a meta religion, but you can't. When you drill down, you can't be involved and in anything else. And you know, the point I made at the beginning, they promise you everything, but legally you have to contractually agree that they guarantee you nothing and they promise you nothing. So they can't reconcile this. We have them on paper. We have evidence of what they say versus what their contracts say. So basically it's a lie. It's all a lie. If I promise you that I can improve your eyesight, while at the same time saying, sign this contract whereby I never promised you that I can improve your eyesight. That's just a lie.
I mean, Tom Waits put it very simply, the large print giveth and the small print taketh away. And in Scientology, the large print is this, well, Scientology leads to success in any walk of life. It's compatible with every other belief system. It will cure everything and anything. And the small print is, you've just signed a contract accepting that we're lying. We're making this up. It's a story.
Yeah, and we're seeing this. We're seeing this even in like Val Haney's case, where they want to drive her into arbitration. So not only are we not promising you anything, but we're going to strip you of your legal rights to sue us in court and force you into an arbitration, where only Scientologists in good standing may rule on your arbitration, which means a foregone conclusion to remain in good standings as a Scientology arbitrator. You have to rule on behalf of the church so that you're not declared a suppressive person.
Yeah.
And this is why you do your work, why I do my Scientology Money Project. And by the way, I'm working on a piece right now where in a piece of Scientology where Hubbard explicitly says someone is to be fair gamed.
Okay.
This is a document. Yeah, he's fired someone for being a homosexual. He said this person is fired for being a homosexual, explicitly fired for being a homosexual, and then he accuses them of stealing something. And he says they are to be fair gamed. This was before the so-called you can't use fair game in any PR policy, but it still exists, right? So I actually found a document where he orders someone to be fair gamed. And I'm going to put that on my blog pretty soon. So there's elements in that recruiting process of undue influence. In the TRs where there's undue influence and they take you over, right?
Yeah.
So there's parallel tracks going whereby one is to exert control over you and get undue influence to manipulate you to do anything. There's another legal track to strip you of your rights and promise you nothing. So Scientology wants ultimately to protect itself. It wants money, power, control, and it wants absolutely no liability, accountability for anything.
No.
And this is the fraud of Scientology. We want everything, but we want accountability for nothing. And it's interesting they attack psychiatry, and psychiatrists are accountable legally, criminally, in every way for malpractice,
absolutely,
conduct, right?
Yes.
So Scientology is demanding that, you know, they have a stat of how many psychiatrists we destroy, right? And David Miscavige talked about destroying psychiatry. Psychiatry is accountable for what it does. It can be sued. Individual doctors can be sued. They can be imprisoned. Scientology has zero accountability. And that's what that goes to a deeper flaw, maybe for another program, of religion in America is a broken system altogether. And that Scientology enjoys a lot of the benefits of the big religious groups, you know, where they've gotten certain protections. Because it's basically impossible. There's only 3 people in all of the US government that can call for an examination of a religious group's 501c3 tax-exempt charter. Only 3 people in the entire US government. IRS Commissioner Exempt Organizations, IRS Commissioner, or the Secretary of the Treasury. Those are the only 3 officials in America that can call for an examination of any religion's tax-exempt status. Now, if there's a criminal activity like Tony Alamo or other things, that's a different matter where there's criminal activities. So Scientology, the idea of someone entering it in 2021, I can't see why they would do it with all the material on the internet. And also the lack of informed consent on the part of Scientology, the bad faith. They can argue that there was informed consent to the contracts you signed, but if they've manipulated you and you found your ruin and you're in fear, you think they're the only one to help, you'll sign anything to get help.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of the intake system. I've always studied the intake system, not just legally, but the psychological predation of the intake system, the body routing, finding your ruin, promising Scientology can help you, telling you you won't get any worse, but you'll get better. And then you mentioned they take you into the TRs. And part of that is that you're willing to be controlled, that you are willing to be controlled and take orders and listen. So this psychological system of predation that's wrapped within legal documents, that's wrapped within First Amendment religious protections, Scientology has concentric rings of defense. Now, where all that went out the window is in the Danny Masterson rape case, criminal rape case. Danny Masterson, Scientologist, has been charged with 3 counts of forcible rape, which in California carry a sentence of 45 to life. My view and belief is that the Church of Scientology will end due to criminal activity. really because they are self-destructive and they are fundamentally engaged in criminal activity. And below that are acts of bad faith, violations of public policy, law breaking, use of child labor, bringing in foreign workers, exploitation of various forms. So I'm glad for the work you've done for decades in exposing this, and we keep working to do it, John. And the more we can inform the public about how dangerous Scientology really is, how it ultimately is a master race group out to control the world, and it's quite psychotic, vicious, and evil. And it uses the law to its advantage. And one point I'll leave you with to end off. Hubbard said the law can be used to harass people.
The law can be used very easily to harass.
So file lawsuits against people.
A manual on the dissemination of material from 1955, where again, I think anybody who's involved in Scientology, I didn't read that until after I'd left. And of course, the point is you don't read more than about 1% of the material because you read what's on the courses. But that particular doctrine, which was re-released in the technical bulletins in the 1970s, is unbelievable. You are looking at the rantings of a madman. That and probably the HCO Manual of Justice, which I think is online. I think anybody should look at those things and say, do I want to be involved in a group that does this? On the point of fair game, of course, one of the things that Hubbard very definitely did do was issue what are called R245 orders, which are orders to kill somebody. And these were issued by Kevin Victor Anderson, who held the inquiry in Victoria. He issued an R245 order saying that Scientologists can kill this man and should kill this man. And they were put on the front of the Auditor magazine. There was nothing hidden about this, Hubbard's intention. So on the point of contracts, I just wanted to say that there is a point in law that a contract is not legal if it is entered into under duress. So if you're drunk, yes, if you're stoned, if you're having a psychotic break, if you're threatened, the contract is not legal. And the point you were making before, all Scientology contracts are under duress for a very simple point. I have a friend who left Scientology, I don't know, about 10 years ago, but he'd read my book, Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, 10 years before. And he's the only person I've met who's read the book and managed to stay in, because there is quite a lot of material in there and it's all checkable. There are 1,100 reference notes, so people can go off and check. But so I said to him, well, why didn't you leave then? And he said, because I was frightened I would lose my immortality. Now, if that's not duress, I don't know what duress is. It's not that we're going to lock you in prison for a year or 10. You are going to die forever if you don't follow this route.
John, let me jump in. There is a fear of losing your immortality among Scientologists. Now, I worked with someone about 10 years ago who wanted to leave the church. They contacted me. I did not contact them.
Yeah.
And I asked the same question. I said, why don't you want to leave? And he looked at me and he said, because they are scary motherfuckers. That's exactly what he told me. They are scary motherfuckers. He was terrified that he left and they had all the dirt on him. Hmm. And I'm not going to say anything more than that. His parents were very prominent. Hmm. And he was terrified of the church. And that is psychological duress.
Absolutely.
He eventually went off the radar. He just quit participating, and he had to work with a therapist for a long time. They really did a number on him. They ruined him psychologically, and he's still in recovery in Scientology. John, what I'd like to do on our next show is maybe talk about the Manual of Justice, intelligence operations, get into the real nitty-gritty of what they're doing, what they did then, what they're doing now. Because I have some really interesting information on some of their current contemporary practices. There's a lot of things I've uncovered recently that are of interest.
Yeah.
But they're rooted in the Justice Manual and how Scientology is going to form an intelligence agency, dirty tricks, fair game, gaslighting. I'd really like to get into the policy and structure and operations on our next interview and get into some real hard-hitting material.
Let's do it.
As I'm watching the Masterson case, other cases unfold, I worked on GPP Capital. Scientologist David Gentile was arrested by the FBI in February. He's going into the criminal trial phase on his $1.8 billion Ponzi scheme. And the things that are going on are very interesting in that case. So I'd like to just get into the secondary phase of this, of once they get you in, how they keep you in. And it's not, you know, and there is a fear of losing your immortality. And I'd like to talk about that metaphysically, what that means. I'd also like to do another show with you to answer this question. Scientologist claims to have Buddhist DNA or be like Buddhism when it's not anything at all like Buddhism.
No,
you know,
well, let me tell you a little story about that. Brown McKee testified at the Clearwater hearings. He'd been involved that was in 1982. He'd been involved for 24 years. And he said that when he came to Scientology, Hubbard made all of these claims about physics. And because he was a physicist, McKee knew that these claims were nonsense, but he was very interested in the claims about Buddhism. And I had to laugh when I read that because I came in from Buddhism and I knew that all the claims about Buddhism were nonsense, but I was very interested in the science.
Yeah, you know, let's do both shows sometimes, because I spent a lot, 20 years in Advaita Vedanta.
Okay.
And I know that, very much Buddhism. And then those two things would be interesting, because when you get Scientology trying to be everything to everybody, like the old Saturday Night Live line, it wants to be both a dessert topping and a floor wax. And it can't be. And maybe that's part of its ruin, is it wants to be too much to too many, and it wants to do so while being dishonest and deceptive and manipulative, vile, predatory, cunning.
Well, I wrote a paper long ago, 1993, called Scientology, Religion or Intelligence Agency. It's still on the internet. And Chris Owen, the wonderful, brilliant Chris Owen, tells that what triggered him to come back to the topic, because he abandoned it and he gave me all of his materials years ago. But he came back because he read that paper and he wanted to get into, well, what is the intelligence agency? And he has done incredible work since then and will produce, I think, a definitive book about Scientology's harassment of anybody who dares say anything negative about it. And
Chris has done marvelous work. So let's do another show. I'll end it with this. I was talking to a very prominent journalist recently. They were interviewing me off the record, and as a private investigator, they wanted to know certain things. So I basically, here's how I describe Scientology: is a big box of fireworks that is about to go off. It's got a lot of explosive content. And I think the next year, there's a lot of explosive content in Scientology that is just primed. Metaphorically speaking, it is just primed to explode, and not in a good way. I've always said that cults always end badly, and that Scientology will be no exception. Cults always end badly. And right now we're seeing it ending very badly. And the reductio ad absurdum for me, the reduction to the absurd, is that all those 71 years of work of Scientology come down to protecting a B-list actor named Danny Masterson, who's accused of multiple rapes. They covered it up. Was it all for naught? Did it come down to protecting a rapist? And if any Scientologist listening thinks about that, it's devastating. I don't even think they could confront that.
Yeah. And so we'd like to advise David Miscavige that it's time to move to the Dutch Antilles and claim the living trust that he has registered there, I believe, with quite a lot of money in it, and give the rest of the money back, because it's a con, it's a fraud, it doesn't achieve, looking quickly at the abilities gained in Scientology, the ability to communicate freely with anyone on any subject, the ability to recognize the source of problems and vanish them, relief from the hostilities and sufferings of life, the ability to be at cause without fear of hurting others. There's an interesting one. You won't be frightened of hurting other people. Freedom from upsets to the past, the ability to face the future, the ability to experience sudden change without becoming upset. That's the point where you suddenly realize that you don't have any of these abilities. And the fourth release grade, the ability release, moving out of fixed conditions into ability to do new things, ability to face life without need to justify own actions or defend self from others. Loss of make guilty mechanisms. So we'd like David Miscavige to lose his make guilty mechanisms and close the whole charade down, because it really doesn't work. There are no clears, there are no OTs, there are no releases. And the answer that I remember talking with Karen a few months ago, and she said, and then they'll say, didn't you have wins? And there we are.
And there we go.
It's been a real pleasure, Jeff.
Yeah, likewise.
And I'm John Atack, my wonderful guest, Jeffrey Augustine, and we will see you again very, very soon, I hope. Thanks so much. Cheers, bye. I'm going to stick your recording off and I'll... Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.